Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of Transylvaniacs, which chronicles the journey of two idiots trying to watch as many Dracula adaptations as possible.
Each episode, we try to explore every film adaptation of Dracula, from Dracula to Dracula Z.
I love it. I'm never going to get tired of that. Will, how the hell are you?
I am doing all right. Fending off a cold right now as best I can. It is that season again. I always forget that part about fall. Every year I look forward to it and forget that I spend like maybe a quarter of it just knocked out.
Oh, yeah, same. It's like I have the curse of being extremely sensitive to heat. So I fucking hate the summertime. But then in the winter, when the heat is like cranked, I'm also miserable because like not only am I hot, I am dry. So I'm like definitely suffering at the moment.
Yeah, it is. We are all just at the mercy of our heaters and our AC units, I think.
Holy shit, yes. Does your, like, what's the deal with your heat? Do you have radiators?
I have we have radiators that just sort of run along the floor of the apartment, and they just kick on sometime in the fall.
Yeah, we also have radiators, but like the way our apartment is set up, we're in like an old Victorian that's been converted into apartments because I live in Pittsburgh, and we're on the 3rd floor, and I'm like 99% sure our landlord is like, for tax reasons, has this whole building written off as like a single unit because like there's 2 apartment 2s and like there's only one thermostat in like the whole building, and the people excuse me, and the people in the 1st floor control it. So like we don't control our own heat. We just have to like very awkwardly text the nice gay guys downstairs and be like, "Hi, sorry, can you turn up the heat because it's really cold up here?" So we are at the mercy of both our landlord and our neighbors on that front.
That's good. That sounds like a good solution.
Yeah. It's also like our landlord like built us a balcony randomly in 2020, and we're like, was that an excuse to charge more rent? Or was that because the building wasn't up to code because there wasn't a fire escape?
So you build one out of wood. That seems the best solution.
It's fine. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Oh, God. Anyway, I was just going to say, I hear you in the past couple of weeks in between our recording sessions have had a topical, fun little adventure, if you want to tell us about it.
Yes. So this past week, I went to Dracu-thon that was hosted by the Rosenbach Museum in Philadelphia. And oh,
that's awesome.
I got into this a little bit in an earlier episode, but a lot of the earliest notes for the book were written by Bram Stoker while he was visiting Philadelphia back in the day. And all of the notes are preserved in an archive at the Rosenbach, which is like a book and literature museum in Philly. And so to celebrate that legacy, they did a overnight reading of Dracula. It started at about, I think, 4 p.m. last Friday and went until about 9 a.m. then on Saturday the next day. And I just come off of a 12-hour work shift and still managed to drag my ass down there for at least 2 hours of it. And it was great. Everyone who worked there was wonderful. All of the readers knocked it out of the park. I gotta highlight this one dude. If you recall from your reading of the book, there's like a part where a wolf escapes from the zoo and a reporter goes and talks to like an ornery zookeeper.
Yes.
The dude who did that part did all of the voices and he put that seasoning on it and he knocked it out of the park. Just absolute dude of the week status with that guy.
That's so good. I love the idea of like a marathon where you read an entire book out loud. Like that's a really fun idea. And it makes sense for Philly, and it makes sense for, you to go to, even though you had just busted ass at work. I appreciated your photos that you sent me where you were like, there is, as always, definitely a man in a cape here.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you have to have a dude in the cape. I would feel cheated if nobody was in a cape there. There's a woman in a very severe old Victorian dress, which is also wonderful.
Yes, I love that. I did a photo shoot a couple months ago with one of my friends who makes like like leather accessories and jewelry and stuff. Um, and she partnered with somebody who runs a vintage store, and I'll have to see if the photos ever get released. I don't know if they ever will. But I had a like very cool like Victorian kind of like nightgown thing on. Yeah, like with some of Kat's work, and it was just like really fucking cool. And it definitely, wearing something like that does make you feel like a severe ghost. Like I felt a little haunted.
Victorian ghost chic is, I think, the next big trend.
Yeah, it's coming back. Also, if you ever go into like a Target or anything, everything right now is like very ruffly.
Yeah,
There's a lot of ruffles happening.
Target is in its like prairie wife era for some reason.
Yeah, Target is giving giving a BYU.
But yeah, I think probably by the time of this episode, I'll have the photos from this Dracu-thon thing posted up and sort of pinned to the top of my Instagram profile, and we'll share that at the end of the episode. I think next year, if they do this again, I'm going to try and do a reading.
Please do.
This is way out in advance, but I'm putting it out there. I'm going to manifest this.
Do you get to like pick which section you read, or do they assign you?
I think they assign you one.
Ah, damn, because I kind of feel like it would be really fun to like pick the section. But then also I was talking to you and I was like, we can go do that together. And if I wind up with any of the remotely sexy sections, I will commit ritual suicide on stage. What a mess. Anyway, Will, this week, what are we looking at?
I'm really excited about this week's episode. This week we are looking at the 1931 Spanish language version of Dracula. It is the same version of Dracula that we watched for the last episode, but filmed on the same sets at night with a completely different cast and crew, and in Spanish.
First of all, I love that concept, like, and it's such a relic of the time. Like, can you imagine fucking a Thor, you know, the 5th or 7th fucking movie in the Thor franchise, having the exact same set, and then having a completely different cast and crew come in and film, you know, the same movie in like Portuguese or some shit in the middle of the night. That just like wouldn't happen. I mean, first of all, because we don't really use sets for things anymore. It's like either on location or, to quote Jamie Lee Curtis, a green screen in a warehouse somewhere. Yeah, I was really excited about this one. A little background on the film. So again, as we discussed a little bit, this was filmed at the exact same time as the movie we watched last week. The director of this is George Melford, and this was also commissioned by Universal Studios. There was a big push in the 1920s by Universal to get some of their films filmed in other languages, and this was part of that. And pretty directly, they don't state it, but their goal with this particular version was to spend as little money as possible. However, in a delightful twist of fate, they definitely wound up with a better movie, and we're going to get into why.
Yeah, almost across the board, with a few notable exceptions, this is just a much better version of the movie than the English language one that most people know.
Yeah, and I was very surprised to see that. Had you seen this before?
I'd seen this once before, back in like 2016, when I was regularly writing for Rooster Illusion Reviews. I was just looking for something kind of novel to write about during the Halloween season, and this had been something I'd heard about a couple times but didn't know much about. And for years it's been included as like a bonus feature if you buy the regular version of Dracula on DVD. And so I was able to check it out there, but I had not seen it since then.
That's wild. I didn't even know this fucking existed. Like, until we started doing this project, I think that you might have mentioned it, being like, yeah, you know, and then we'll have to do kind of a double feature with the Bela Lugosi Dracula and then, you know, the overnight crew. And I was like, what the fuck are you talking about? But yeah, I was really, really excited about this. Do you want to give us a little bit of background on the kind of cast and crew and a little bit about the production? Because usually what we would do in an episode like this is kind of go through the plot and all that first. But because it is essentially, with a few, again, exceptions, the same script on the same set, I don't feel like we need to retread familiar ground except for when we're talking about some key differences later. But if you want to give us a little bit of background on the director and the production, we can kind of go into that first, if that makes sense to you.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's rock.
So this movie was directed by George Melford, who had been a sort of steady, dependable director for Universal throughout the 20s and 30s. He directed a lot of stuff that I guess you would sort of adventure serials, things that got butts and seats. They were maybe part of a larger feature or show, but weren't really the main stars. They all had names for the most part like Jungle Terror, East of Borneo, and Love in the Desert. So, yeah. So obviously this man was the perfect choice to do an adaptation of Dracula with a Spanish-speaking cast. As you might expect, George Melford did not actually speak any Spanish.
Yeah, no.
And so he had to give all of his directions to his cast through a translator, and all of them were from different Spanish-speaking countries. A few were from Spain, a few were from Mexico. Through this translator, they somehow ended up with a better version of Dracula than what they were making during the day. A few more interesting stuff I found out about the production is just sort of the genesis of specifically how this project came about. So the producer of this movie was Paul Kohner, who at the time of the movie had been courting Lupita Tovar, who plays Eva, who is the Mina analog in this movie. And she had been sort of a relatively unsuccessful actress up to this point in the studio system and was preparing to ship back home to Mexico. And Paul Kohner was not about to have that, so he scrambled to try and find a project that could keep her in the States. And so he pitched to Carl Laemmle, the head of Universal, the idea of doing this Dracula adaptation, because it'd be cheap, they have the sets already, they could just shoot it at night, and it would be basically no real additional cost to them. And through that, they were able to get this beautiful, strange little movie made.
That's so wild. So he fully was like, listen, my girl's gonna get deported. So let's make a movie on a tight budget. I kind of love that.
Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of, obviously there is a lot of competition in this field, but this might be one of the better works of art that was produced out of pure thirst.
100%. Yeah, that would be another podcast for you and me, which is like the most obvious movies produced out of thirst, including the entire directorial career of W. Paul Anderson.
Yes.
Anyway, yes. So again, Melford began directing the film, shooting at night with the other crew, directed by Todd Browning during the day. And something that I thought was interesting in kind of reading a little bit about this is that the scripts were obviously very similar, but not exactly the same. And you can kind of tell that whoever worked on this script was more interested in adapting a novel. There's much more of a kind of prosaic sense of the script in this version, I find, whereas the other one feels much more like a stage play. It's very stilted and there's a lot of space. Whereas this has some of the kind of the poetry and the beauty of the original novel. And a couple other things about the production before I get too wrapped up in talking about, some of our thoughts and the performances in this, is that the crew that was in there at night under George Melford, actually the daytime crew would leave the marks for the actors. So like, not only did you have like the same set, you had people in the same places, and there are parts of this film that are directly shot for shot exactly the same, just with different actors. But there are some differences, and it's kind of fun to watch these back to back and be like, yeah, they definitely were like, we're just going to make the same movie again, and still a better movie emerged.
Yeah. So actually, I have a few things. So that screenwriter was Baltasar Fernandez Cue, who was famous at the time for doing a lot of these Spanish language adaptations of scripts for Warner Brothers. One of the other things that I learned is that the way they improved upon a lot of the shots and a lot of the blocking in the English language version is that George Melford and Carlos Villarreal, who plays Dracula, would watch the dailies for the English language version as they were coming out so they could figure out how they could improve upon the shots.
That's so good. Just like we're gonna spy on the production that's getting the budget, and just like quietly fix all of their mistakes in the off hours. That's so fucking good.
So we've gone a bit into a little of the production. Do we want to talk about sort of who this cast is?
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about the cast and like a little bit about kind of this era of filmmaking and why there might be some notable differences. But let's start first with the cast, if you want to hit that up for us.
Absolutely. Playing Conde Dracula in this movie is Carlos Villarreal. As I mentioned earlier, Eva, who is this movie's version of Mina, is played by Lupita Tovar. We have Barry Norton as Juan Harker. We have, and I'm going to tip my cards now, maybe our best Renfield yet, Pablo Alvarez Rubio. We have Eduardo Rosamena as Van Helsing. Jose Soriano Viosca as Dr. Seward, rocking an incredible mustache. And then we have Carmen Guerrero as Lucia.
And what I love about that cast is, part of the reason that I think many of them, including Lupita Tovar, were cast is because they didn't really demand salaries because they were working in kind of a secondary market. They couldn't ask for what, Bela Lugosi could ask for. Even Carlos Villarreal, who was more well-known, even though this was probably his largest role, he still had a bit more of a career than some of the other actors. And I was really blown away, with the exception of Carlos Villarreal, with the performances in this version. I think that we're probably on the same page there about how shockingly awesome everybody did. Again, especially compared to the English language one, where Bela Lugosi is like incredible and everybody else is completely milquetoast. This was the inverse.
Yeah, exactly. Everyone else in the cast is really bringing their A game. I think a lot of it is also there's not the same dead air in between dialogue readings that you get in the English language version. The dialogue moves a lot more naturally, and the performances are heightened in a way that they really need to be for this material.
Right, exactly. And like part of what was so kind of infuriating about the English version is that Lugosi gets it. Like he is giving it his all. He is chewing scenery, and everybody else just seems kind of like nonplussed. Whereas I think I don't even know if it's a cultural thing, but like I feel like, a lot of people when they discuss particularly Spanish media or Spanish language media, they think of like telenova and things like that, where there is kind of a sense of melodrama. And I don't know if that came from this era or if that's just kind of like a cultural thing, but there's tropes with American media as well, but you definitely see that here with everybody, but it's not tacky. It's just heightened, like you said, and it 100% suits this so well. Like it's a lot more engaging a watch because the dialogue is quicker paced, and everybody seems to give a shit. Whereas in the other version, it felt like everybody was kind of irritated to be there.
Yeah, I think you're 100% accurate on that. It feels like this is a crew that is invested in what they're making. It feels like they're trying to prove something, that this little scrappy night production is going to be something that's going to eclipse the English language version.
Yes, and there was an NPR article that came out 3 weeks before we started making this podcast. I'll link it. But it's about the Spanish Dracula and how they're actually going to be making a movie about the making of this movie, which is kind of fun. Pretty much said like what you exactly just said, which was it can be seen as an immigrant story. And I quote from Chris Weitzier. Yes, okay. Such a great immigrant story, and it's such a great Latino story because oftentimes coming to this country, you have to work harder, you have less support, less opportunities, and you still have to deliver. And they over-deliver it, as is often the case. It's a beautiful underdog story, and you can definitely see that when you're watching this movie. Like, this is a crew of people who, exactly like you said, a scrappy little production with something to prove, and they fucking knocked it out of the park.
I mean, I think it's very telling that even the way that we view immigrants in this country today, that even though this is, I think, a superior version of the movie, that even though we've had it readily available for a number of years at this point, I think it became available on VHS in about 1992. The narrative around this movie is still that it's kind of this weird little curio instead of a film that is worthy of watching on its own merits.
That's too bad because it really is a good movie, and like it's a good adaptation of the original. Obviously there's some changes, and they're the same changes that are in the English language version as well, but I feel like in terms of capturing the atmosphere and kind of the mood of the original novel, this one is phenomenal. And some of that again is down to the performances. I feel like, you know, when we did the previous episode, we really talked a lot about how entrancing Bela Lugosi is, and in this version, that honor goes to Lupita Tovar. Holy shit. I think both of us have notes. Just kind of go on about just how fucking incredible her performance is and how fucking beautiful she is, dude.
Oh yeah, I think I just have noticed Lupita Tovar is just insanely gorgeous.
Yes, and mine is Ava, comma, 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 comma. So hot. And holy cow, she brings both a playfulness and a sensuality to Mina that I think is really important for that character. I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about our Minas because she's my girl. But you know, much like an adaptation needs to have a good Drac, it is underrated how good the Mina has to be. And I feel like particularly in comparison to her day crew counterpart, Lupita just does such an incredible job. I think she feels much more like a person as opposed to like, you know, nearest female character. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this feels like somebody... I mean, she acts like a young woman would act. She doesn't feel like a sort of stilted set piece that you unfortunately get from the American version of, the English language version of the film.
Right, exactly. And like something about her delivery too, like she's excitable, and you can just tell that she really took this character as being a person instead of just like saying the lines, you know? And I don't know if this sounds bad, but one of my notes that I took here is that like this film and this script sounds better in Spanish. Like the English language version is as we've talked about, so stilted, and there's just a lot of weird space, and it feels really kind of wooden, and it's awkward to listen to, even though there are some extremely poetic lines. Hearing this all in Spanish and some of the changes made to the script to bring back that more literary quality, I think really enhances the atmosphere of this as well. Like it sounds appropriately gothic, and then kind of hearing these long monologues that we get from some of the characters, particularly Mina and Renfeld, I think the language just suits the production in every way.
Yeah, you're pretty spot on about that. I think particularly with Renfield, that was for me the performance that stuck out the most.
Holy shit, yes.
Yeah. With all respect to the English language film, which has, one of the all-time great weird little guys of Universal, there's something about Pablo Alvarez Rubio's performance that is just so good. There's depth to it, but there's also, he knows when to just bug out with a role.
Yes.
He goes from 0 to insane in no time flat.
It's kind of impressive, and like what I really like about his is like we heard, you know, Lupita Tovar bringing a sort of depth and humanity to Mina that we don't see. You know, the other Renfield is very fun, but it's again, as you said, just a kooky little guy. This Renfield is like tortured in a way. Do you know what I mean? Like you can actually see how much it pains him to be under the thrall of Dracula. There's scenes with him where he's talking to literally a bat on a string, and like I felt for him. This character often just gets really flattened to a one-dimensional like he's the crazy bug guy. But I was really impressed by this. He, as I have in my notes, can seriously wail. Like some of the noises this man makes are kind of alarming to hear. And I think this performance of all the Renfields we've seen, he is the top by far. You know, we're doing our grand Drac ranking. Sure, we'll do that at the end. Our grand Renfield rating, this guy's at the top. His performance is absolutely amazing. And I think that the director knew that. And as a result, kind of gave him more screen time than he probably should have had, but I was okay with it because, you know, he was great to watch. He was commanding. I feel like if we were to see a version of this now, he would have been played by like a John Turturro kind of type. You know what I mean?
Yes, I was getting a lot of different things, like different actors from his performance. John Turturro is absolutely in there, especially him, like when he's sort of like throwing himself to the ground and sort of like doing like wringing his wrists and kind of thrashing about. It's very much, I think we watched Miller's Crossing in a screenwriting course years ago.
Yes, we did.
And there's a scene where John Turturro's character gets taken out into the woods, get whacked, and he just falls to pieces. And it's like a very similar energy.
100%. And about his, you know, he looks similar too. He's got these kind of bug eyes. God, yeah, I was really captivated by that. And even in this version, Juan Harker, as we, you know, Juanathan, somehow the English language version, Jonathan, is like even more boring than usual, which is at its baseline pretty excruciatingly boring. This Jonathan actually had shit going on. Like, I was rooting for him and Mina. He seemed invested. He seemed to actually care about his fiance, as opposed to just being kind of like an annoying side character. And I was very impressed by that as well. And then lastly, I guess our other main two would be our Seward and our Van Helsing.
Yeah, I feel like Seward in this movie, across both versions, I don't have a lot to say about him because
no, I don't either.
There's not a lot for him to do.
No,
that's one of the other weirder things about making Seward Mina's father as opposed to Lucy's suitor, is that there's a different relationship, but his character arc is also really foreshortened to just being concerned dad.
Right, and like I feel like that's kind of a strange way to adapt that. And we'll see a lot of, particularly with our Gang of Light, our Christian hardcore band. We'll see a lot of ways in which those characters are abbreviated, combined, cut all together, mutilated, twisted in order to fit the script. And I understand
Quincy,
why.
done dirty so many times over.
Done dirty like time and time again too, and I'm just like terribly sorry about it in advance. I get why they would be tempted to have a father figure for Mina, but it doesn't work, particularly in this version. He kind of just winds up being the same character as Van Helsing, because Van Helsing kind of has a necessary paternalism to him, and it's not great. I didn't care for this one a lot. This Van Helsing I actually liked more though than the English language one.
Yeah, I think they're very similar performances. If my memory serves, they look pretty similar.
They do. They just look like little old Dutch dudes.
Yeah. I think Rosamanda has much more of this grandfatherly warmth than his English language counterpart did.
Yeah, there was definitely more going on with this one, whereas the other one I think came across as a little disengaged and a little uninterested, whereas I think you are absolutely correct that grandfatherly warmth is coming across here, which makes sense. You know, like we'll see a lot of different interpretations of Van Helsing, and more often than not he winds up being like your badass hunter, as opposed to what he is in the books, which is an old Dutch man specifically.
Yeah, I think particularly as we move into the Hammer era, we're going to see, even if he's played by Peter Cushing, who's never really an actor, you're going to be like, oh, Peter Cushing is just strapped. But he is decidedly more of a man of action. And in this, I do appreciate that they lean into, he's just an old guy. He's going to maybe toddle across the screen.
Yeah, he's got his herbs and shit. Yeah.
Even if he's not drinking a glass of port, spiritually, he should always be drinking a glass of port.
Absolutely, yes. The big port energy. I don't think I've ever had port. It's just dessert wine, right?
It is. I really like it because as I get older, it's what I want from a drink, and that it tastes good and immediately makes me want to fall asleep.
I was going to say, that makes sense that you like port because you are at heart an old waspy man.
Yes.
Well, I guess that leaves us to kind of our central letdown of this film, which would be Carlos Villarias's Conde Dracula. Oh, I wish this was better. I wish this was better than it was. Will,
Yeah,
I don't love this.
there are parts of it that there's certain moments that I really like. There's a scene where he is at Seward's sanitarium and talking with Mina and sort of laying on this sweetness, and then Harker comes up behind him and says something, and there's this look of utter disdain across the Count's face that I love. But a lot of those moments are kind of too few and far between. His spooky face is just very silly.
It's so fucking goofy. Like, that was my main note where I was like, dude, you're mugging. Like, Dracula is straight mugging in this version. He looks really silly. And it undercuts pretty much the whole vibe of the movie. That was my main issue is that, and the fact that I don't know if they had some sort of like prosthetics or dentures for him for this, but the teeth look kind of goofy as well. And because of the way they are situated in his mouth, it also causes him to lisp. And it really kind of just takes the winds out of the sails of any of the tension, because if you're not either afraid of or attracted to or both of a central villain like Dracula, like, what's the point? Everybody else does such a good job as well. So I think, particularly in contrast to the rest of the cast, it's pretty disappointing.
I've realized what his spooky face reminds me of, and it is the face of somebody who has just made a pun or a joke and is waiting for you to get it.
Oh, that's good. Yes, very much so. I was going to say it's giving Tina Belcher, where it's show me your everything's okay face. Oh, poor Tina. Did not care for this performance, which is too bad. I really wanted to like it, but I feel like if we had gotten Bela Lugosi with the rest of this cast and this director, we would have had like a slam dunk film.
Yeah, I mean, if he already learned to speak his lines phonetically in the English stage play, let him phonetically speak his lines in another language. I mean,
please, like, come on.
Yeah. I mean, you're already shorting him on his pay for the English version. Give him some extra change here, Universal.
Give him a little chump change, dude. Yeah, I think what you said earlier about like a look of disdain on his face, that was kind of the vibe I got from Lugosi the entire time, was like barely concealed, like utter repulsion and irritation for everyone and everything around him, particularly other men. I feel like that's what Carlos Valarias was going for, but because of just like the way his face is and the fangs, it doesn't come across as menacing. And then you contrast that with Mina's one of her final scenes. So we talked a little bit last time about how we finally get to see some personality out of the English Mina. With her scene with Jonathan on the balcony where she's like in the process of turning and she tries to seduce him, that we saw like a little glimpse of a good performance there. Whereas this version with Lupita Tovar, that scene was stunning. I was like completely enraptured that entire time. She's this really great combination of predatory and kind of coy at the same time, and she hit the fucking nail on the head, dude. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it is a hell of a performance in that scene. She's doing a lot of this kind of coquettish look as she draws Harker in, and there's just a hint of madness in her eyes too.
Yes.
Really giving it her all there. This is the moment where a character that up to that point for the most part has been more reserved, and even though she's done great work within that box, this is where she really gets to let it all out. Right.
And like an important thing to note in that scene is like, and this is kind of a good segue, is we actually see Mina attack Jonathan there. Whereas we don't. We just kind of see her look at him like she's about to, and then she gets cut off in the English version. So this version overall is about 20 minutes longer than the English version. And is substantially racier, both in costuming and violence. And we kind of talked a little bit about why that might be. And even though both of these versions were pre-Hays Code, there were definitely some things, some limitations in place that they could sneak around with this version. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so if you're not familiar, the Hays Code was pretty much before the modern day rating system that we know. Hays Code was what was in place before. It really technically went into place in 1930, but it wasn't really enforced until like 1934. So before that, there was a list of don'ts and be carefuls for the industry, and it was a lot of the basic stuff that you'd expect. No swearing, no sex on screen, no hard violence, and then, the gross stuff that is unfortunate to the 30s, so like no miscegenation, no homosexuality.
Yikes.
There's one note here that's just 5, white slavery, and I'm not clicking to see where that link goes on Wikipedia.
Oh, no. Oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, but even with those very loose guidelines in place in 31, the English language version still really plays it pretty close to the code. And this one, and I kind of wonder if it's because it was for an audience in other countries, if they were not as concerned about the code. I also wonder if it was because this is just like a fly-by-night production at night, that there's no real overhead, like truly the earliest versions of Mods Are Asleep get sexy.
Yes, 100%. And and I mean, this premiered in Cuba, so they were kind of working with a different audience in mind. And I really appreciated your note here, which was, did we racism our way into a better movie? Did they think that Spanish language audiences would be able to handle more sex and violence? And I guess the answer is maybe, but as a result, the movie is way fucking better.
Yeah, and like you said, it premiered in Cuba, and there were not really a lot of English language reviews to choose from. I found one from the LA Times that was pretty positive, but also seemed like it maybe was a little hesitant about the extra sex and violence in this. I have a portion here that I highlighted. There is very little to be said about so familiar a story, except that it should be well received wherever shown, for although being extremely exciting at times, it nevertheless is a rather good entertainment.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. In terms of reflective reviews, ones that have come out contemporary to us, people are kind of on the same page as that, like, this is a superior movie by far, but the suffers only when you compare the Draculas, whereas there's a great one here by Mark Deming of AllMovie that says, Spanish language Dracula suffers only when one compares Carlos Valeria's performance as Dracula to Bela Lugosi's. While Valeria's is adequate then as now, Lugosi owns the role. And like, I do kind of feel bad for him because like, what are you going to do with like a performance like that? You kind of were doomed from the start. But it appears that we were on the same page with some of the contemporary reviews, both then and now. Speaking of in general, this being a bit spicier production, I have to talk a little bit about these costumes, dude. Holy shit. I was so surprised to see how lush and gorgeous the costuming in this was. It feels like they actually had somebody on set who was committed to putting together something that's like stylish, Dracula looks essentially the same, but particularly in Nina's costuming, she's for most of this either wearing a nightgown or lingerie. In Lucy's single scene in the movie, she's not wearing a lot, but it's really, really beautiful, like fine lace and silk kind of negligees, and it just suits the production so well. It really has that old Hollywood vibe. Whereas in the other production, I feel like everybody looked very bland and like it could have kind of taken place anytime. This one feels very distinctly 30s to me. It has that fashion that would have been popular at the time. People have, like, particularly the women have finger waves and these really, really thin eyebrows. And it just feels much more like you're watching a really glamorous period film as opposed to like kind of a bland old-timey movie. And even the men's costumes I was impressed by. Toward the end, where Harker and Van Helsing follow Renfield to the Abbey to find Dracula and rescue Mina, they're both wearing these like full-on 30s gangster suits with peacoats and fedoras and leather gloves. And I'm like, this just looks like, again, like someone gave a shit, you know?
I'll even say with Dracula's costuming, it feels just different enough to give Villarreal as Dracula a different vibe. So
yes, for sure.
So in comparison with Bela in the role, Villarreal is wearing more traditional white tie evening wear, something that would feel more contemporary to the 30s. I think part of the costuming with the cape and with the pendants that Bela Lugosi is wearing feels much more ancient. It feels like part of an older world. Even when he's across the ocean in America, he feels like he's part of the past. And
right. No, that makes sense.
Something about the menace that we get from Villarreal is at least the fact that he is in modern evening wear makes him seem like just a regular gentleman about town. He could be anyone until he bears the fangs.
That's good shit, Will. Yeah.
He also wears his top hat a lot, and I really love just Dracula just marching out on these misty moors in a top hat.
Oh yeah, it's a great vibe. But yeah, I was really impressed with the costuming in this. And again, you know, there was less of a concern for the ethics board, so they were like, "Listen, Lupita Tovar is beautiful, so we're gonna get that nightgown as low cut as possible, and everybody here is gonna enjoy it, including people almost 100 years in the future."
Thank you for that.
Thank you so much. Really, really appreciated that. Like we discussed a little bit, this version is longer, and there's a couple of additions that I think are like really important. Most kind of noticeably, this fills some plot holes and gaps that make sense to me, whereas, you know, the English language version would have assumed that their audience was likely familiar with the source material. This one does not make any assumptions, and in so fills some kind of weird gaps that were in the other version. And I think that is definitely for the better. And the main difference is we get a much less abrupt ending. A lot of the complaints about the English language version is that, like, okay, now it's over. Whereas we get much more of a complete arc with pretty much every character here. And I think that is for the benefit of the film, certainly. And because, again, we were less concerned with not showing violence, one of my main gripes about the English language version is that we cut immediately, like, before anything good was going to happen. Whereas we see a lot of violence in this version. And again, it's not graphic because it's 1931, but it actually feels like you're watching a completed narrative film where you have ups and downs, you have moments of intensity and moments of action and a climax, as opposed to like little scenes in a play where they fade to black because they don't have the technology to show you what they actually want to show you. It feels like the best shit happened off screen. Yeah, I really enjoyed this a lot. This version also kind of explains some more lore, you know, like I don't want to get into like every single difference because we'd be here forever, but I was overall really, really impressed with this. What about you?
Yeah, I think the fact that they take the time to explore who Renfield was before he went to Castle Dracula was great. They actually go into what happened to Lucia after she rises from the grave and what became of her instead of the American version. Or God, I keep saying American, which is just not a good look. I apologize. Please cancel.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
The English language version, where Lucy rises and it's like, well, that's freaky. Let's never mention this again.
Yeah, man. Like they actually have a scene in the Spanish language version where Van Helsing and Harker kill her. And then like Juan is upset about it and he's like, oh, don't worry about it. Like she'll be at peace now. Whereas in the other one, they're like, oh yeah, that's crazy, huh? Like, and you know, we get some scenes with Dracula and Ava's maid, where you can kind of see like his clever plan of like how he's able to infiltrate her chambers and like get rid of the wolfsbane. Whereas in the other one, it's just kind of like, oh, it's happening. You know what I mean? It was really good. There's also, even though there are some really nice shots in the English language version, this one, I think overall was just created with much more of a sense of like cinematography and visual art in mind. There's obviously some sections that are shot for shot. You know, there's some things that they did exactly the same because that's how it made sense to do it at the time. But man, there's some really, really lush and beautiful shit in this, particularly towards the end at Carfax Abbey. You know, the scene where we see Dracula carrying Ava down the staircase, right before his confrontation with Renfield, which you see him fucking murder Renfield on screen. Just beautifully fucking shot, dude. And I think we both actually had a note that the last shot of the film was like really stunning.
Yeah, so the last shot of this movie has a very wide shot of Juan and Eva leaving the abbey, going up this gigantic staircase, and then at the bottom of the staircase, in the center of the frame, you have Van Helsing cradling the body of Renfield. And the construction of that shot is absolutely stunning. It's steeped in shadow. It is just perfectly set. It has all the characters dwarfed by the sheer magnitude of the set piece itself. It feels like, I mean, every shot a painting.
Yeah, exactly.
But it does. I know it's a cliche, but it feels like it could be a painting.
Like you could definitely see that. And again, I think this is was just like really, really artfully put together. Is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we kind of move on a little bit?
Oh, the one thing I want to touch on that's just an early big laugh for me early in the film is, we mentioned before that there's they just throw whatever animals they can into Dracula's castle, including some possums. They have those same shots, but they're clearly different because one of the possums just kind of eats shit. It is just like walking as the wall just abruptly falls off, and I'm sorry. Like, I literally howled.
That's so good. He was just like, oh, sorry, buddy. That's so fucking good. Yeah, I was also happy, just like in terms of miscellany, I was happy that the brides in this version got to do like literally anything. They just kind of had to stand at the edges of the frame in the English version. Whereas in this one, they actually were the ones who get to attack Renfield. And again, we get to see a glimpse of it. Like, wow, some action on camera in a movie where things happen. Can you imagine? So I was happy for them. They did good. They deserve it. The girls have been waiting a long time for a fresh little man to nibble on.
This one's for the girls.
This one's for the girlies. So I guess what we will do then is kind of move on to our segments. So quickly, I guess, we always like to pick a note of the others to read out of context. My note for you this week was no butthole. Which refers to a one-off line in the previous episode where there's a little like Cockney child who says flower for your buttonhole, which I misheard as butthole. But I just love Will with a single bullet, no butthole.
I think my favorite for you is genuine question. Is no one watching the inmates at the asylum?
Okay, I'm right though. Jesus Christ. The entire plot of this particular, like, both of these Dracula films is that Renfield is just like getting out all the fucking time, and like nobody seems to fucking give a shit except for the orderly, who in both versions is in some sort of slapstick comedy instead of the movie that the rest of the cast is in. But yeah, he's just like wandering the fuck around and like breaking into Seward's house. And I'm like, this man is supposed to be like essentially in solitary confinement, and you're telling me he just climbed up the fucking balcony? Like, nobody's watching? Okay.
I think they threaten him with a straitjacket at one point. And it's like, why weren't we there already?
Yeah,
this is like the fifth time he got out. Come on.
Like he's just like constantly popping over like he's an annoying neighbor in a sitcom. He's like fucking Kramer. Like
oh my Jesus. God, wow. It is a wasted opportunity that we never got Michael Richards as Renfield in that
I would have, oh man, too bad he went off the fucking rails, but I would have watched the shit out of that. Oh, that's good. That's good shit. Well, I guess in terms of our grand ranking, I personally am going to put this Dracula at the bottom of the ranking so far. I did not care for this performance, and I think it pales in comparison to both Max Schreck and Bela Lugosi.
Yeah, it's unfortunate that he has to take the bottom slot right now. I'll give him a couple bonus points because he sort of looks like Brian Ferry of Roxy Music, which is a band I love.
Wow, yes, he does. Oh my god.
But unfortunately, still at the bottom.
Still at the bottom. This Drac was neither scary nor sexy, but just a little goofy and weird. Alas, shit happens. And then I guess we will talk a little bit about next time. I believe next episode we are going to be watching the 1958 Hammer Dracula with Christopher Lee, and we will probably have our first ever podcast guest. Whoa!
Yeah, we are jumping up a couple decades.
We might be back to the 30s. We have a Turkish Dracula from 1931, but we didn't want to do two, like 3 or 4 black and white films in a row, with 2 of them in a row being non-English. So we might jump back to that, but for now, we're moving on up, and I think this is going to be a super fun one, especially considering our guest.
If we can lure them out of the crypt in which they reside, which is the state of Maine.
I was going to say, I think it's just Maine. But anyway, I'm really excited about that. And then, as per usual, as is tradition now, we must do the reading of the tweet. I believe, did I read last episode or did you?
You did.
I think I did. Okay, so it's your turn.
Our tweet this week is actually right in line for this episode. This tweet comes from @Swaim_Corp. Pro tip. Nosferatu is what you call vampire familiars. If it's a vampire you haven't met before, it's preferable to use Nosferatu instead.
Oh, it's so good. It's so fucking good. It took me way too long to get this because I don't speak Spanish, but, I'm familiar enough where I was like, oh, that's funny. It just took me reading it like 3 or 4 times. Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, taking, I think 4 years of Spanish between high school and college paid off right now.
Wow. I'm happy to hear that. I took an enormous amount of French, but if we ever watch anything in French, I can guarantee you I will not be helpful in the slightest.
I guess we'll just have to find out.
Next time on Transylvaniacs. Thank you all for listening. Have a good night.